In the vast history of the Roman Empire, few figures have stirred such a complex mixture of emotions as the gladiators. They were viewed with admiration and desire, yet also with fear and contempt. A living paradox, men marginalized by society, deemed infames, people without honor, and yet elevated to the status of icons, worshipped by crowds and desired by the elite. The gladiator was not merely a fighter, he was a symbol. In him, the deepest tensions of Rome converged, violence as spectacle, eroticism as power, and discipline as a way of life. His body, sculpted by exhausting training and marked by scars, embodied brute strength and virile beauty. It is no coincidence that he became the object of cult-like fascination. His sweat was sold as an aphrodisiac elixir, his blood used in magical rituals, and his image reproduced in frescoes, sculptures, and everyday objects. Yet behind the admiration lay a contradiction. Socially, a gladiator was an outcast. He shared the same status as prostitutes, actors, and executioners, people who, in the Roman mindset, stood outside the circle of civic honor. And yet, upon entering the arena, these same men could eclipse senators, generals, and even the emperor himself, becoming the focus of every gaze. There, before tens of thousands of spectators, each of their gestures, a strike, a fall, a defiant look, was charged with political and social meaning. The appeal of gladiators extended far beyond the arena. It also fueled fantasies and desires in the most intimate spaces. The Roman elite, fascinated by the virility of these combatants, saw in them not only warriors but forbidden objects of desire. Their image circulated through forums and private bedrooms alike, inspiring tales that ranged from secret passions to scandals that bordered on myth. Thus, the figure of the gladiator stood at the intersection between the sacred and the accursed. They embodied both glory and humiliation, power and slavery, life and death. They were men who, though destined to be forgotten, ended up leaving an immortal mark on the Roman imagination and on the memory of humanity. This story invites us to go beyond the bloody spectacle and delve into the most intimate and hidden aspects of their lives. We might ask, how were their personal relationships inside and outside the ludus? Why did they arouse such desire among the women and men of the Roman elite? What pleasures, often forbidden or ritualized, surrounded their existence? To explore the world of the gladiators is not merely to speak of combat and violence, but to uncover how an entire society projected onto their bodies its deepest obsessions: power, desire, discipline, and death. The birth of the gladiator in Rome was no accident, but the result of a complex intersection of ritual, religion, and spectacle. To understand it, we must go back to the 3rd century BCE, when Rome was still influenced by the customs of the Etruscans, its neighboring and rival people. Among the Etruscans, armed combat between men formed part of funeral rituals. When a noble died, it was not enough to bury him with offerings, his departure had to be accompanied by a shedding of blood symbolizing the passage to the afterlife. Thus, 2 warriors would fight before the tomb of the deceased, not only as a tribute to his memory, but as a sacrifice reinforcing the bond between life, death, and the gods. This deeply sacred act would become the seed of the gladiatorial spectacle. Rome, with its characteristic ability to absorb and transform foreign customs, adopted this practice and adapted it to its own social and political context. At first, the munera, that is, the combats offered in honor of the dead, were organized during the funerals of great aristocratic families. The clash between gladiators was seen as an act of filial piety, a bloody homage to a fallen ancestor. But Rome's logic soon turned ritual into spectacle. What began as a private act of devotion became a public event capable of drawing crowds. By opening the combats to the community, the elites found a new tool of power. They could display their wealth by funding the games and at the same time strengthen their political prestige by winning the favor of the people. Over the centuries, the munera ceased to be mere funeral ceremonies and evolved into one of the most popular entertainments of the empire. The symbolic funeral faded amid the roar of the masses, and the arena transformed into a space where Rome's most cherished values were enacted: discipline, courage, and endurance in the face of death. In this process, the gladiator evolved from a ritualized human sacrifice into an indispensable actor within the Roman social order. He was, at once, a victim, since he usually came from society's margins as a slave or prisoner of war, and a hero, for he embodied the strength, virility, and glory of Rome before the world. The religious origin was never completely lost. Even in the great amphitheaters, such as the Colosseum, the idea persisted that the blood spilled in the arena was not merely for entertainment, but a reminder of life's fragility and the grandeur of sacrifice. Every combat echoed those first Etruscan rituals: blood as offering, combat as passage, and death as spectacle. In short, the origins of the gladiators reveal the essence of Rome itself, a civilization capable of transforming the sacred into the political, the ritual into the public, and the private into a weapon of power. The Roman gladiator lived in an ambiguous space, on a border where contempt and veneration coexisted in contradiction. In the eyes of Roman law and morality, the gladiator was an infamous, a dishonored person, a social category that also included prostitutes, actors, and executioners. To be infamous meant lacking full rights and being marked by the loss of civic dignity. They could not hold public office, testify in court, or legally marry women of good reputation. Society viewed them as tainted figures, excluded from the moral order. Yet the same society that despised them also adored them. In the arena, gladiators embodied the most Roman virtues: discipline, courage, and contempt for death. While a senator could speak in the forum about valor and virtue, it was the gladiator, bloodied and standing tall before danger, who truly demonstrated it through action. The people found in them tangible heroes, flesh and blood men who carried the Roman ideal of bravery to its ultimate consequence. This duality produced a fascinating phenomenon: the lower a gladiator's social status, the higher his popular prestige could rise. It was not uncommon to see the walls of Rome covered with graffiti where young people wrote the names of their favorite gladiators, along with phrases of admiration or desire. In Pompeii, for example, inscriptions have been found describing gladiators as Suspirium Polarum, the sigh of the girls, reflecting the attraction they inspired in women. Eroticism played a key role in that fascination. The gladiator's body, muscular, scarred, and forged through pain, became an object of desire. For the Roman aristocracy, which valued virility and physical strength, gladiators represented the rawest and purest form of masculinity. There was even a belief that the sweat or blood of a gladiator possessed aphrodisiac and magical properties, and these fluids were sold in small vials as if they were perfumes or elixirs. Such practices show how, beyond their social rank, gladiators had achieved an almost sacred symbolic status. But desire for gladiators was also seen as dangerous. The elite feared the erotic and emotional influence these men could exert over highborn women. The most famous example is that of Faustina the Younger, wife of Emperor Marcus Aurelius, whose alleged passion for a gladiator was used as propaganda to stain the imperial family's reputation. Stories like this, whether true or invented, reveal how the gladiator embodied a threat to the established order, a man without legal honor, yet possessing a magnetism capable of unsettling the lives of Rome's elite. The gladiator's status, therefore, was a constant paradox. Excluded from civic privileges but acclaimed by crowds, despised as infames yet desired as erotic and powerful symbols, used as entertainment but feared as figures capable of stirring uncontrollable passions. In them, one of Rome's deepest contradictions was reflected: a civilization that preached order and discipline found its favorite spectacle in chaos, violence, and the allure of those who lived outside the law. The life of a gladiator almost always began with a forced renunciation of freedom. Slaves and prisoners of war were bought by lanisti, owners of gladiator schools, and from the moment they crossed the gates of the ludus, they were subjected to a regime that combined military discipline, brutality, and a routine designed to transform their bodies into fighting machines. The ludus was not a simple training ground. It was a closed, almost prison-like world where gladiators lived, ate, and slept under strict surveillance. High walls surrounded the facilities, and escape was nearly impossible. Yet within those walls, the gladiator's identity was forged, a blend of soldier and living spectacle. The lanista, usually a former gladiator himself, held absolute power. He owned not only their bodies but also their fates. He decided who trained with which weapons, who went to the arena and when, and who deserved special treatment for showing talent or obedience. Under his supervision worked the doctors, instructors specialized in different combat styles. Each gladiator was assigned to a category. Mirmillo, armed with a heavy helmet, rectangular shield, and short sword, Gladius. Phraax, inspired by the Thracians, with a small shield and curved sword, Sicca. Retiarius, who fought with a net and trident, symbolizing agility against brute strength. Hoplomachus, modeled after ancient Greek hoplites, with a spear and round shield. Each fighting style defined not only the technique but also the narrative performed in the spectacle. An agile Retiarius facing an armored Secutor embodied the eternal battle between speed and impenetrability. Thus, the ludus did not merely train warriors, it produced actors for a bloody tragedy. Their diet was another surprising aspect. Contrary to what one might imagine, gladiators did not consume large amounts of meat. Their diet was mostly plant-based, barley porridge, legumes, bread, and occasionally cheese or fish. This gave them a layer of fat that, far from being seen as weakness, protected their organs during combat and made wounds less lethal, thereby prolonging the show's longevity. Hence their nickname, Hordearii, the barley men. Training was relentless. They practiced with wooden weapons heavier than real ones to build strength and endurance. Movements were repeated endlessly until they became instinctive. They also trained in theatrical techniques, dramatic falls, expressive gestures, and poses designed to thrill the audience. Combat in the arena was not purely improvisation, it was partly choreographed, crafted to impress as much as to kill. Outside the arena, life in the ludus was harsh and monotonous. They slept in shared cells under constant watch, and relationships among them were complex. On one hand, camaraderie was inevitable, they trained together, shared pain and suffering, and forged bonds of brotherhood. But at the same time, they knew that one day they might be forced to face each other in mortal combat. This constant tension made the life of a gladiator as psychologically brutal as the fights themselves. The Ludus Magnus, located next to the Colosseum in Rome, is one of the best documented examples. Archaeological excavations have revealed the remains of its structure, cells, a training courtyard, and underground passages that connected directly to the amphitheater. From there, the gladiators would walk toward the arena, knowing that each entrance could be their last. In essence, the Ludus Gladiatorius was a factory of spectacle and death, an institution that combined military discipline with theatricality, where men reduced to property were molded into symbols of power. And although they lived under harsh conditions, some gladiators found in this system a strange sense of purpose, the recognition of the crowd, the chance to earn rewards, and, for a fortunate few, the longed for freedom through the gift of the rudis, the wooden sword symbolizing the end of slavery. The gladiator was not just a warrior. His figure embodied an erotic allure that went far beyond the arena. In ancient Rome, where the strong, disciplined male body was a symbol of virility, the gladiator became an object of desire, a myth of fertility and, in certain contexts, even of magic and superstition. Although their social status placed them among the infames, along with prostitutes, actors, and executioners, their image evoked an attraction that defied class boundaries. They were publicly despised but privately desired. This contradiction made them figures full of ambiguity, both admired and reviled at once. Constant training sculpted their bodies into muscular forms marked by scars. Each scar was a testament to battles survived and, for many Romans, added an irresistible magnetism. The sweat of gladiators even became a commodity, it was collected in small jars and sold as perfume or aphrodisiac. Writers like Pliny the Elder mention that some women applied it to their skin, believing it enhanced beauty and desire. Even the blood of gladiators acquired mystical value. Some people drank it in rituals, convinced it transmitted strength, courage, and vitality. This practice, especially among high-born women in secret settings, reflects the almost magical fascination the gladiator inspired as a symbol of extreme virility. Roman women, particularly from aristocratic families, were famous for their attraction to these fighters. Satirical writers like Juvenal and Martial tell stories of women who preferred the company of gladiators to that of their respectable senatorial or military husbands, an unbearable humiliation for men of prestige. The most famous case is that of Faustina the Younger, wife of Emperor Marcus Aurelius. According to rumors passed down through tradition, probably for propagandistic purposes, Faustina became so obsessed with a gladiator that she fell ill with desire. The oracle consulted by the emperor recommended a remedy as disturbing as it was symbolic. The gladiator was to be executed while lying with her, bathing the empress in his blood, after which she could return to her husband's arms. Whether true or not, the legend reveals how the gladiator's body was seen as an object charged with erotic and mystical power. The gladiator also played a role, albeit indirectly, in marriage and fertility rituals. One documented practice involved using swords stained with the blood of dead gladiators to part the hair of brides during wedding ceremonies. This contact with the warrior's blood was believed to transmit strength, fertility, and protection to the marriage. Likewise, certain Roman erotic amulets, such as the fascina, phallic charms, were associated with the figure of the gladiator and his virility. These objects aimed to channel the sexual and protective energy linked to the fighter, weaving the gladiator's body into a magical imagination that extended far beyond the arena. The allure of the gladiators also lay in danger and transgression. To desire a gladiator was, in a sense, to defy Rome's moral values. For an elite lady, to take a gladiator as a lover was scandalous, but also an act of defiance and a secret charged with passion. This play of contradictions made the gladiator not only a man of arms but also a symbol of forbidden desire. Gladiatorial eroticism became a social language. A free Roman man was expected always to be dominant, the one who imposed control. The gladiator, though a slave or prisoner, was coveted precisely because he embodied brute strength and absolute physical dominance. In his figure converged the erotic fantasies of a people who saw in him both an object of pleasure and a reminder of the limits of power. The world of the gladiators, dominated almost entirely by men, also had a fascinating and lesser-known chapter, that of the gladiatrices, women who dared to enter the arena and challenge both death and the norms of their society. Although records are fewer compared to those of male gladiators, literary, epigraphic, and archaeological evidence confirmed that women fought in Roman amphitheaters. Their very presence represented a social provocation, a doubly transgressive spectacle of violence and the defiance of traditional female roles. The gladiatrices were not common, rather, they were exceptional performers, carefully chosen to impress. Their combats were usually reserved for special occasions, private elite celebrations, or shows where the organizer sought to astonish the audience with the unexpected. Roman historian Suetonius and other ancient authors mention that some emperors, such as Domitian, organized nighttime spectacles in which female gladiators fought with burning torches, heightening both the drama and the erotic tension of the event. These combats were seen as extravagant luxuries, entertainment reserved for those wealthy enough to indulge in such excesses. Unlike their male counterparts, female gladiators often fought bare-chested or wearing minimal clothing, such as leather thongs. In many cases, they did not wear helmets, allowing the audience to see their faces, hairstyles, and feminine features. This combination of violence and eroticism both fascinated and scandalized Roman spectators. The intention was clear, not only to display skill, but also to exhibit the female body in a context where it was normally confined to modesty and silence. The gladiatrix became a symbol of the forbidden, the embodiment of a dangerous desire that defied Rome's moral order. Sources suggest that female gladiators came from various backgrounds. Some were slaves or war prisoners forced to fight as punishment or entertainment. Others, however, came from aristocratic families who, out of whim, rebellion, or moral decadence, chose to test themselves in the arena. This scandalized Roman society, as it meant that women of high status voluntarily abandoned the ideal of feminine modesty and lowered themselves to the rank of infames, social outcasts, just like male gladiators. One of the most significant archaeological finds confirming the existence of female gladiators is a statue discovered in Halicarnassus, modern-day Turkey, now housed in the British Museum. It depicts a woman bare-chested, standing in a victorious pose, holding a sicca, a curved sword, and a shield. Experts agree that it represents a gladiatrix, proving that these fighters were not mere legends. Additionally, Roman inscriptions mention combats between women, referred to as ludia or simply gladiatrices, indicating that their presence was noteworthy enough to be officially recorded. The participation of women in gladiatorial combat stirred controversy in Rome. While such events drew large crowds, many viewed them as a sign of moral decay. Writers like Juvenal harshly criticized noblewomen who engaged in these spectacles, seeing them as evidence of corruption and the degeneration of traditional values. Indeed, by the late 2nd century CE, under Emperor Septimius Severus, a formal ban prohibited women from fighting in the arena. This decision revealed that, although female gladiators had existed, their presence was considered too threatening to the Roman social order. Despite official censorship, the image of the gladiatrix survived in the Roman imagination as a symbol of exoticism and transgression. Her figure embodied two forces that Rome both adored and feared: the violence of combat and the power of female sensuality. Female gladiators were rare, yet their impact on collective memory was lasting. They represented the boundary between the permissible and the forbidden, between desire and condemnation. And in that boundary, they left an indelible mark on the history of Roman entertainment. Although the arena was their main stage, gladiators did not disappear once the combats ended. Many found new roles in Roman daily life, where their bodies, skills, and reputations remained valuable assets. Outside the amphitheaters, gladiators became personal bodyguards, secret lovers, and living symbols of power and virility. Constant violence in Rome made gladiators ideal protectors. Wealthy citizens, senators, and even members of the imperial elite hired them for travel or during periods of political instability. A trained, armed gladiator could command instant respect, and, if necessary, intimidate would-be attackers. Some lanisti, owners of gladiator schools, even rented out fighters as temporary mercenaries. These services were expensive but highly sought after by aristocratic families seeking protection. Having gladiators as bodyguards was not only practical, it was a public display of status and dominance. The erotic appeal of gladiators, so evident in the arena, extended into private life. Many upper-class women had affairs with them, a phenomenon so widespread that it alarmed the state itself. Satirical writers like Juvenal mocked noblewomen who, though married to senators or generals, preferred the muscular, scarred bodies of gladiators. These relationships, however, were both scandalous and dangerous. A gladiator, deemed infamous, could never be an equal. Thus, such romances were usually kept secret, though rumors spread quickly through forums, baths, and markets. The forbidden nature of these encounters only heightened their intensity, fueled by risk and social taboo. A famous example comes from Emperor Augustus, who decreed that women must sit in the uppermost seats of the arena during gladiatorial games, to minimize visual contact with the fighters and reduce temptation. Yet the fascination these men inspired was so powerful that even law could not suppress it. Beyond the erotic, the gladiator was a symbol, a representation of absolute virility, raw strength, and the courage to face death. This image permeated multiple aspects of Roman life, from marriage rituals to fertility superstitions. For many Romans, owning or being near a gladiator was like touching a source of almost magical power. They were not mere fighters, they were living embodiments of endurance and might. This explains why their image was so coveted on many levels: political, social, erotic, and even religious. Yet this dual life outside the arena revealed the fundamental contradiction of their existence. Gladiators were sought after as protectors, desired as lovers, and revered as symbols, but still considered dishonorable and socially tainted. This paradox made them ambiguous figures, despised in public, yet irresistible in private. Their daily lives oscillated between marginalization and admiration, stigma and fascination, making them some of the most complex and compelling characters in all of Roman society. The image of the gladiator dominated the Roman imagination for centuries, but over time, even these blood-soaked idols began to fade. Their decline was not sudden, but rather the result of a profound shift in the values of the empire, especially after the arrival of Christianity. For the early Christians, the gladiatorial games were not symbols of glory but of decadence. The arenas were seen as temples of sin, places where death was celebrated instead of life. Writers such as Tertullian and St. Augustine condemned the spectacles as incompatible with the new vision of spirituality and human dignity. The change in mentality began slowly. During the first centuries of the Christian era, the combat still took place, but their popularity was no longer the same. The crowd still came, but the sight of blood began to disturb more than it fascinated. The final blow came in 404 AD, when a Christian monk named Telemachus rushed into the arena of the Colosseum to stop the violence. He was killed by the enraged crowd, but his act had an enormous impact. Emperor Honorius, pressured by the spirit of the times and by Christian leaders, decreed the official abolition of gladiatorial combat. Rome had changed. What had once been a symbol of civilization was now seen as barbarism. The end of the gladiators also marked the end of one of the most brutal and spectacular traditions of the ancient world. Although they disappeared in practice, the gladiators never vanished from memory. Over time, their image evolved, from that of blood-stained slaves to archetypes of courage, sacrifice, and endurance. Literature, art, and centuries later, cinema, transformed the gladiator into a tragic hero. Spartacus, for example, ceased to be merely a rebellious slave and became a symbol of freedom against oppression. In the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, gladiators were portrayed as epic warriors, and in modern times, their figure has inspired everything from novels to iconic films like Gladiator. Thus, the gladiator went from being a man marked by infamy to becoming a universal legend. His body, once exploited in the arena, became a metaphor for the human struggle against adversity. The gladiator died in Rome, but was reborn in the collective memory. Today, when we gaze upon the ruins of the Colosseum, we do not only think of the brutality of the combats, but also of the symbolic strength of those men and women who faced death, becoming eternal protagonists of one of humanity's most intense stories. The story of the gladiators is a living paradox: men and women who, though slaves, criminals, or outcasts, became icons of an empire that both worshipped and despised them. Their bodies were molded for battle, turned into spectacle, and at the same time desired, consumed symbolically as sources of power, eroticism, and vitality. They represented Rome's greatness and its misery at once. On one side, discipline, strength, skill, and courage in the face of death. On the other, humiliation, blood shed for amusement, and lives reduced to currency in a political and social game. Beyond the arenas, their presence permeated all corners of Roman culture, from wedding rituals to imperial legends. The elites looked at them with desire and disgust, the crowds with fascination and fear, the poets with inspiration and critique. No other figure in ancient Rome embodied so many human contradictions within a single skin. The twilight of the gladiators did not erase their legacy. On the contrary, it elevated it to the realm of myth. What was once considered infamy became, over the centuries, a symbol of resistance, passion, and tragedy. Spartacus, the gladiatrices, the anonymous heroes who fell in the sands of the Colosseum, all of them remain alive in the collective memory. Today, the ruins of Roman amphitheaters speak not only of architecture and imperial power, but also remind us of a time when life and death were the most coveted spectacle. A time when thousands died to entertain a people, and without knowing it, left a mark that would never fade. The lesson they leave us is as clear as it is unsettling: humanity has always felt drawn to violence, to strength, to sacrifice. Yet it also reminds us that even in the most extreme brutality, human beings can find symbols of resistance and dignity. The gladiators died in the arena, but their memory defied time. And perhaps that is why, centuries later, we still speak of them, we still look at them not only as victims or killers, but as protagonists of one of the most powerful stories in human history.